we go. Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our live immigration Q&A. My name is Sisha Maharaj, and I'm a senior consultant with Devant. We are so pleased to have you join us today with our special guest, Elizabeth Long. Next slide. Just a little bit about Devant. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we help students and graduates get hired in Canada. We support over 25,000 job seekers across Canada, and we host over 500 events every year since 2019. We currently work with over 30 employers, 25 universities and colleges, and 10 non-for-profits. And we are here to support you, to help you in your journey in Canada, specifically in getting employment. Next slide. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Right now, all participants are muted. There's no need to use your video. However, you can submit questions if you'd like in the chat. And in the Q&A, I'll be monitoring those questions as we go along. This session is recorded and it will be shared with registrations by email. You can also let me know if you have any technical difficulties, and I'll answer you in the chat as well. And then finally, future sessions are listed under the events tab at www.devant.ca. So thank you so much for joining us. And I want to introduce our expert speaker for this session. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Long, barrister, solicitor, and partner of Long Mangalji. Next slide. Today, Elizabeth is going to talk about the 5 rules to follow when studying as an international student. And I'd like to pass it over to you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much again for your time and for assisting students, international students across Canada with this very important information. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sisha. It's wonderful to be here with you guys as always. You know, there are a lot of things these days in the news about international students. There are protests happening all over the country. There are, a lot of news. There's a lot of changes that are going on in the programs. But you guys, I wanted today to talk about 5 rules that you guys should follow. And if you follow these rules, likely you should be on your way to having a good chance to qualify and get permanent residence. In the end of my presentation today, we'll give you, as Sisha had said, a chance to ask questions. Now, just to keep everything in one place and for us not to get confused, I would request that you put your questions through the Q&A box that should be on the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, put them through there, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible tonight. All right, so 5 rules. What are these rules? The first one is keep in status. Okay, when you have a study permit, you will have an end date on your study permit. It's very, very important for you to note what that date is. That is the date that your status in Canada will end. You will be, your status as a legal a temporary resident who is studying in Canada will end unless you do something about it before that date. Okay, so make sure that that date is in your calendar. It's circled many, many times, or you put it in your phone and you have many, many reminders several months before. If you apply to extend your status before it expires, and you put the application and you submit it properly. What do I mean when you submit it properly? I mean, you first of all pay the right fees. You apply for the right forms. You submit the right forms in there, and you actually submit it. It actually goes through the system. Okay, your filing extension, not a new study permit, for example, right? Then, if you've submitted it properly, even if you don't have a decision before your study permit expires, you can continue to stay in Canada, study, work until a decision is made on your study permit, and hopefully at that point it will be a positive decision. Okay, that's called maintained or implied status. Now, what if you forget? Don't forget, you shouldn't forget now that I've told you about this. But what if you forget, or if you made a mistake on your study permit and it comes back and it's denied? At that point, you do have a second opportunity. You have 90 days from the date that your status expires. So if you filed it in time, right? If you filed it before your current study permit expires, that status expires when? Not on the date of the expiry of your study permit, but when you get the negative decision on your application. If you don't file it in time, then your status would expire on the date of your study permit. Okay? From that date, you have 90 days to file a restoration of status. Now, the difference between the restoration period and the maintained status period is if you've lost your status, you don't get your status back just because you filed it. If you've lost your status, status will continue to be lost. You cannot study, you cannot work until you get it back, until they make a decision and they say, yes, we are granting you the study permit. It's only then that you can study or work. Okay, so you don't want to lose a semester, for example, by not filing your application in time. Okay. Number 2, make sure you actively pursue your studies. Now, your studies, even though you have a study permit, let's say for 2 years, okay? It doesn't mean that you won't lose your status within that 2-year period of time. The rule is if you stop actively pursuing your studies, that means, for example, you're enrolled as a full-time student, you're going, or enrolled as a student, even if you're not full-time, you're part-time, enrolled as a student, you're, going to classes, etc. Okay, you're actively pursuing your studies, you're fine. But if you stop doing that, if you're no longer going to be enrolled as a student at the school, then you will lose your status 90 days after you stop being actively pursuing studies. If you drop out of school, then 90 days afterwards, you lose your status as a student. There are 2 exceptions to studying. One is if you are on a scheduled break. So, everybody in your program, according to the academic calendar from school, is able to go on these breaks, summer breaks, reading week, etc. Those are scheduled break. And during those scheduled breaks, you are able to work full-time. Okay, and that's still actively pursuing studies. Then there's another one that's personal to yourself. Let's say for some reason, let's say you're sick or and you're not able to study, okay? Go to the school and you can ask them to give you authorized leave before you leave, okay? Before you take off the semester, ask the school to give you authorized leave. If you get authorized leave from school, that's okay. You are still considered actively pursuing your studies and you won't lose your status as long as you go back after the 1 semester. Third thing, make sure you work legally. There's so many convoluted rules for international students. It's very easy to get confused. I just want to go through a few of them, okay? First of all, working whilst you're studying, okay? You can only work while you are a full-time student, except in the last semester. If you go down to part-time, you're not allowed to work. based on the study permit alone. If you had a work permit, that's not a co-op work permit, but a work permit that allows you to work otherwise, you could. But if you're just working based on the fact that you have a study permit, you can only do so if you're a full-time student, except in the last semester. So if you're on authorized leave, for example, you're not a full-time student, you are not allowed to work at all. Once you've completed your studies, you are then no longer a student. At that point, you cannot work at all. Okay, you can't say it's a scheduled break. It's not considered a scheduled break. Once you've received the first notification from the school that you've completed your program, at that point, you have to stop working. The only time you can continue to work is if you finish that program and you're going to start another program, and that period in between is only less than 150 days. So 1 semester in between, you can work in that semester. So let's say I finish my program in April. Then I've already been accepted to my second program in September. If I've already been accepted to my second program in September, I am able to work in that summer semester in between. Off-campus work. A lot of people think, well, I have an off-campus work permit, and so it allows me to work, right? Anytime, right? I can work full-time because of the off-campus work, sorry, not off-campus. Sorry, let me go back. This is off-campus work, not co-op work. Off-campus work. How many hours can you work off-campus? You can work off-campus right now, 20 hours a week. These things change all of the time. And today we're going to talk about some of the new announcements on work permit changes, etc. The only way that we're able to update you guys on news for immigration is through our news list, okay? So if you guys have been registered for this webinar, we're going to register you guys for the news list. We'll update you when there's news on immigration. And some of the things that the minister had alluded to before is that they might change how many hours you can work when you're in class. Right now, it's 20 hours off campus and work. On campus, you can work full-time, okay? And during scheduled breaks, you can work full-time. So the definition of full-time is basically you can work as many hours as you want. There's no limit. It doesn't have to be limited to 40 hours, for example. 40 hours might be normal full-time, but you can certainly work 80 hours if you wanted to during the scheduled break, okay? Now, co-op work permit. Co-op work permit is what I want to say is only for co-op work, okay? It's not for any kind of work. And just because you have a work permit doesn't mean that you can use it to work after you've completed your studies, even if it's still valid. Because on the co-op work permit, you'll see something like for work integral to your studies, to the studies, okay? So this is work that is part of the co-op program that allows you to work there. It's not for any other kind of work. Also, there are some kinds of work that is unregulated, that is not considered work in Canada, that needs to be regulated by the government. One of this kind of work is when you're working remotely for a company outside of Canada. That work does not compete with the Canadian labor market. And so the government doesn't actually consider that as work that is inside Canada where they need to control it, okay? So you could, for example, work full-time for companies outside of Canada and study, and there's no issue with that. All right, number 4, make sure you're doing all this work, and most of you will want to stay in Canada, right? You're studying, you're paying all these tuition fees. Most of you want to stay in Canada. What's critical to you guys being able to get your permanent residence is this postgrad work permit. The postgrad work permit is really a golden ticket. in that you only get one golden ticket in your lifetime. Okay. And so if you're going to get this one golden ticket, don't waste it. Sometimes, I've had people come to me and they've applied for a postgrad work permit just because they could qualify. They didn't really need it because they're going to another program. And, they applied just because they qualified. And then afterwards, when they come back to me and they don't have, when they graduate from the second program, they didn't need it at that point they needed a work permit. They don't have a chance to get another work permit. Okay, so make sure you time the postgrad work permit very carefully. The length of the postgrad work permit is also very important because oftentimes you won't be able to extend your work permit beyond the postgrad work permit. Why is it that there are so many protests across the country right now where students are saying, I'm going to be deported afterwards? It's because they are not able to extend their postgrad work permit. And as a result, because the government is only allowing 1 out of 8 people right now in the country who have work permits to get permanent residence, a lot of people are not going to be able to stay in the country. So it's very important that you understand whether or not you need a 3-year work permit, for example, to maximize your chances, or whether or not maybe a 1-year postgrad work permit is enough. Okay, it's all about planning. Secondly, let's say you say, okay, after this program, I'm going to apply for a postgrad work permit. Make sure you are doing what you need to do in order to qualify at the end. Distance education is often a problem if it goes past the 50% of the program. Make sure this online component, it doesn't go past the 50%. Make sure that it's clear that you are attending in-person classes for most of your program. Secondly, very, very importantly, full-time student status throughout the entirety of your program, except last semester, you get an exception there. Oftentimes I have people come to me and they say, you know what, I just am not able to do full-time studies this semester. I have some health problems or I have some financial problems and I just can't do it. I'm just going to go part-time, okay? And my answer to them is, do you want to stay in Canada? Do you want to get a postgrad work permit in the end? If you do, you cannot go part-time unless it's the last semester. It's much better if you take the entire semester off and you tell the school, can you give me authorized leave? And you take the entire semester off and then come back the next semester and go full-time. Now, very importantly, remember, if you're on authorized leave, it doesn't mean that you can work. You cannot work at all when you are on authorized leave, but at least it'll allow you to still qualify for the postgrad work permit, okay? Sometimes people say, well, my grades aren't very good for this course, so I didn't want it to show up on my transcript. I was going to fail, so, I just decided to drop it. It doesn't matter what your reason is. The IRCC officers are not able to say, oh, okay, that's the reason, I forgive you. They're not able to do that. So for your purposes, in order to get the postgrad work permit, what I would say is, even if you had an F on the transcript for a particular course, it's much, much better than having it drop and having your student status drop to part-time student. Because if that happens, then you'll likely have to do a whole new program before you can qualify for the postgrad work permit. Finally, we can talk about when you should apply for your postgrad work permit. The IRCC website says you can apply for your postgrad work permit 180 days after you've completed your program. But I'm here to tell you, don't follow that. I'm here to tell you to follow the rule that you should apply for your postgrad work permit 90 days after the completion of your program, or If your study permit expires before that, apply before your study permit expires. Okay? If you do so, then you can work while waiting for your work permit. If you don't do that, if you go beyond this program, even if you apply, if you don't apply for restoration of status, your application could be denied, and B, you won't be able to work until a decision is made, and if you get your work permit at the end. The reason why this is important is because you are supposed to have a valid study permit in order to apply for the postgrad work permit. But remember what I said before about you losing your status after 90 days after you've stopped studying? That is the situation here. So if you don't apply within 90 days, even if your study permit is still valid longer than 90 days, you lose your student status, and therefore you cannot work while waiting for your postgrad work permit. And if you don't file a restoration of status with your application, your postgrad work permit could very well be denied as well. Okay, so let's go through a quick timeline of when you can work, when you can study. First, while you're writing your final exams, you're enrolled as a full-time student, so you can work. 2, when you're waiting for your results. No results yet, haven't graduated yet, haven't finished anything yet, still can work at that point. 3, the school has notified you now. Hey, congratulations, you completed your program. Whether it's a transcript, whether it's online in your portal, whether it's a letter, whichever it is, that's the first date that you've been notified. That's when the clock starts ticking, and you have to stop working at that point. When can you start working again? If you submit your postgrad work permit within 90 days of the completion of your program and your study permit is still valid, then you can start working full-time at that point. You don't have to have your postgrad work permit in hand in order to start working full-time. If you meet these conditions, you can start working while waiting for your work permit. All right, last rule, and this is a gigantic one. You have to have a plan for permanent residence. We have had many, many webinars, and you can check them out on the YouTube channel about different ways to get permanent residence. And, I want to get to your question, so I'm not going to go into all of the different ways to get permanent residence. That'll take a couple of hours to do. But one of the things that you need to understand is what kind of study program will give you an advantage. Where you study can be very important these days. There are programs such as the Rural Community Immigrant Program that's going to come into place later this fall that the government has promised that will allow people to apply if they go to certain communities. There are programs such as the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program, where they give advantages, give more points to people who study outside of the GTA, and the most points to people who study in Northern Ontario communities, for example. Okay. The kind of work, what kind of program, if your main concern is getting permanent residence and you don't really care, as long as you can sort of find a job afterwards that will help you, then you should look at what kind of work will help you get permanent residence and what kind of programs will prepare you for that work. Okay, there are certain work that is the government has recognized that is in demand in Canada, and they will give you a lot of priorities to things like that. Some work, for example, you really need the background, like database analyst or software engineer or personal support worker. Some of the kind of work you don't actually need a lot of education, like truck driver. Believe it or not, if you are a truck driver in Canada and you've worked at least 6 months, you'll probably have a lot better chance of getting permanent residence than if you did a business degree in whatever. Okay. So we can certainly discuss that. Then we've already talked about the length of postgrad work permit, right? So right now, the government recently changed the rules. So if you're doing a master's program, you can get a 3-year work permit. It doesn't matter what length of the master's program is. But the other programs, if you've done a 1-year program, you only get a 1-year work permit. If you've done a 2-year program, you get a 3-year work permit. If you did a 1-year program plus another 1-year program, 1 + 1 = 3. You get a 3-year work permit at the end. So that, it just depends on your plan. You know, some people, 1 year is more than adequate to get your PR. A lot of people, it just might not be enough. Okay. Then the kind of work experience. After you graduate, or even when you are studying, you might be able to get work experience that help you. Okay, what kind of work do I need? High skilled, low skilled? There are very few low skilled work that can get you permanent residence. Okay, so and you know, we're not just talking about you per se. We can also talk about your partner, your spouse, your married spouse, or your common law spouse as well. People you're living with for at least 1 year. Okay, and the kind of work experience they have as well. Employed work experience versus self-employed work experience. For the most part, work experience, the government kind of discourages self-employment work. They the work experience that they, for example, counts for express entry Canadian work experience very specifically does not allow self-employed work. That being said, if you are an entrepreneur and you want to open up your own business, there are pathways towards getting permanent residence. We have a whole webinar on that. And we can, you know, if you have questions about it, we can certainly talk about that in a consultation. And we've talked about work experience that is in demand. Truck drivers, for example, healthcare, you know, trades, STEM. So it just depends on what kind of work you're looking for as well. And finally, how can I improve my chances for being selected for permanent residence? We, in the next webinar that Sisha will tell you, have a very good webinar about what to do if your points for express entry is not high enough. And we're going to go through all the different ways that you might be able to get permanent residence, even if you feel that your points right now are just not high enough for express entry. So stay tuned for that. Okay. So I just wanted to have a couple of things for you guys to keep in mind. First of all, number one, what do you need to do? Have a plan. Okay. Go for a consultation. Even if you feel I'm not going to qualify right now, that's all right. You need to know what you need to do in order to qualify. Okay. And do that as early as possible. Number two, once you know that, you need to do what you need to do to get there. Study for exams. For example, the language exams is what I mean, right? Make sure you have the programs that you need. Make sure you have enough time on your work permit, etc., etc. Okay. And third, stay in status. Why is that the first rule I told you guys is stay in status? It is because if you go out of status, your chances drop, you know, by infinitely. Okay. Because if it is that you go beyond, for example, the restoration date and you don't file anything, there are very, very, very few pathways that you are able to apply, because at that point, the government will say, we don't trust this person anymore. Okay, so make sure that you stay in status. Make sure you don't misrepresent. It's very, very easy and tempting right now to go through ways that you say, okay, you know what? I don't think I can get any other way. Someone's telling me pay them a lot of money and they're going to get me PR. And I don't know if it's kosher. I don't know if it's right, but I'm just going to keep a blind eye. And no, you guys are responsible for held responsible, whether or not you know or not, even if you're willfully blind, you guys are responsible for whatever you say, you do. Whatever someone files in your name, you're responsible. And even if in the end you're successful and get your permanent residence, you could lose that at any time. Even if you have citizenship, you can lose it at any time if they find that you have misrepresented. So you shouldn't get yourself into a situation where you won't be able to sleep at night for the rest of your life. Okay. If you do it properly, there are ways for you to get permanent residence. Finally, if you have any sort of rejection, you have to contact a lawyer, not a consultant, a lawyer right away, because only lawyers can go to court. We can see whether or not what can be done in your situation. There are very, very tight deadlines. If you have a decision that you want to challenge in federal court, you only have 15 days if the decision is made in Canada to file the notice with federal court. There are also a lot of other deadlines as well. And you only have one chance for reconsideration, for example, with immigration. If you just file something and you think, oh, I'm just going to write a letter to IRCC, you don't really know what to say. If they reject it, they're not going to look at anything else that even a lawyer later on wants to submit in your situation. Okay. Don't play around with this. This is very, very serious. It will affect you to your life in one of the most important things that you have to do. Don't play around with the system. Okay. All right. So we have now come to the question side. I just wanted to say before we start though, if you guys have any questions, you want to book a consultation with us, do let us know you come from Devant, and we will offer you the discounted consultation rate, which is $100 for your consultation. And we can do it on Zoom. You don't have to come to our office downtown. And we will help you set a plan as to what you need to do to get where you want to go. All right, Sisha.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, Elizabeth, thank you so much. I think that the advice around, having grades maybe that are lower than the students want to, as well as keeping in status, and the timeline that you offered is very, very useful. I see a very big queue of questions here, so I'm going to jump right into the questions so we can try to get as many of the students' questions as possible. Thanks everyone so much for putting in your questions in the Q&A. I am going to go in order, so please have some patience, and I'm hoping to get to all of your questions. We've got almost 20 questions here in the queue. So Pooja says, thanks a lot for sharing your insights on immigration rules. My question is, my co-op starts from September. It's 40 hours per week for 4 months. Can Poojan also work 20 hours part-time at the same time?
Yes, you can. You can work part-time off campus based on your study permit. Your co-op is your based on the co-op program. So yes, that's okay.
Great. I see that Jesseline has a question around careers, and I'm going to ask this, but I'm also going to recommend that you speak with your career center, Jesseline, and feel free to reach out to us. We can also maybe support you. But the question is, for immigration purposes, should an early childhood education student stay in Ontario or somewhere else?
That's a very hard question for me to answer without talking with you about the entire picture. ECEs are needed in a lot of places. It's very hard work. And it really depends on your circumstances. There is, for example, a caregiver program that's coming out that might be good for a lot of ECE students. ECEs at daycare is there. There are different programs depending on your background, depending on your English, depending on your job offers, etc. So come for a consult and we can go through all of those options.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mhm.
Ninesh is asking, how do I renew my work permit if it has already expired? Is it legal to work while getting a renewed work permit? And then what is the timeline for getting a renewed work permit?
So if you have a work permit where you if you have a work permit that is a co-op work permit and you still have a study permit, it doesn't matter if you can work based on the study permit, it's okay. It doesn't matter about the co-op work permit. But if you don't, and right now you're on your post-grad work permit, for example, and that's the only thing that you have to give you status, then if it has expired, you will have to file a restoration of status and get your work permit before you can start to work. There may be other ways where we can apply for a work permit. For example, at the border, depending on your circumstances, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Speaking of which, there's been some changes where the government now has just canceled today the temporary program that's been temporary for 4 years since COVID started, where they allowed visitors to apply for work permits inside Canada. They are no longer allowing people to do that for most work permits. And so it really depends on your circumstances, but if you don't have a work permit that gives you status, you don't have anything else that gives you status that allows you to work, then you'll have to stop working until you get your work permit or anything else, the study permit back that allows you to work.
Mm-hmm. Wow, so that's a very big change that was announced today. Elizabeth, thanks for mentioning that and providing some information around that. So I think that if students are in this situation, I just want to encourage you to reach out to Elizabeth and book your consultation with her. And also, you may have some questions and support from your schools as well. So just make sure that you're getting on that top of that right away if this might be affecting you. I do have a question here, Elizabeth, from an anonymous attendee, but I'm just going to ask this individual if you could please clarify what you mean. The question is, how can one get a co-op work permit changed within 30 days? So I'm not sure if you mean extended or what exactly you mean by that. So I'm just going to ask you to clarify that and submit your question with a little bit more detail. I'm going to move to the next question. This is from Obialor. How can one change his co-op work permit from a current designated learning institution to another designated learning institution within the shortest possible time?
Good question. So that's a good question. You'll have to have it amended. And right now, these co-op work permits, you can only do it inside Canada. When you submit the application, you can submit it and you can submit a web form afterwards saying it's an urgent matter. But oftentimes, it is what it is. They don't allow you to do so. You can use your hours where you can work off campus for at least part-time work for the co-op program as a stopgap. But certainly you wouldn't be able to work full-time in your co-op program unless you have that co-op work permit. So, unfortunately now we're hindsight is 2020, but for those of you who are in those situations, make sure if you're changing your DLIs, you look at your co-op work permit very carefully. A lot of times the co-op work permit will have the school as, the employer. So if you need to change it early before you actually start your co-op work permit.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. I have some questions here, quite a few questions. I'm going to try to get through these. Okay, I'm just sorting through them for you.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Lily. Um, Lily is actually from Hong Kong, looking for a PR pathway stream. She's asking, do I have to show my payslip in order to extend my husband's SOWP when I applied for my postgrad work permit or PR? Is it good that I apply both for postgrad work permit and PR after graduation?
I mean, if you wanted to get permanent residence, we can certainly see if you qualify for permanent residence, then you can certainly apply for both permanent residence and your work permit to allow you to stay in Canada while you're waiting for your permanent residence. That's fine. And for your postgrad work permit, in order to get your spouse a work permit based on your postgrad work permit, you do need to show that you have a job offer. So things like pay slips, a letter of employment from the employer is very important to show that.
Okay. I have an easy question from Florida, I hope. What is the basis of counting the weekly working hours? Is it based on the employer's pay period?
The basis of counting the weekly work hours. It's how many hours you actually work. So you can, as evidence, show it from the pay stubs. Uh, that's what normally we go by with the pay stubs. But yeah, you're limited by the hours of when you actually work.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Thank you. So for example, you're looking from like Monday to Sunday, how many hours did you work? And the maximum part-time is 20 hours right now for
Yeah.
any given week.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a question from an anonymous attendee, and I would just encourage you to connect with Elizabeth for a consultation. This individual is asking for some specifics in the healthcare industry
Mhm.
and the application for a postgrad work permit. So I'm just going to encourage you to connect with Elizabeth directly for that question.
Mhm.
Um, Also, we have another anonymous attendee that's saying, can you kindly advise the insights and how to include my spouse and kids in the postgrad work permit application when they are outside of Canada? Again, I want to encourage you to speak with Elizabeth directly, but Elizabeth, did you want to say anything around that question? Nuances and insights and how to include spouse and kids in a postgrad work permit application when they're outside of Canada.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, first of all, where they're located. We are finding a lot of visa posts right now. Even if you're a spouse, you qualify for the postgrad work permit, they may be denying people the post spousal work permit just because they feel like, oh, they're not going to leave Canada when they're supposed to. We are doing a lot of work in federal court these days to challenge these kind of decisions because they're using a lot of they're using a system called Chinook, where it's a lot of AI, and then these systems are denying people uh, work permits, visas, etc., when there's no real reason to do so. And it's something where an officer is required to be reasonable in their reasons. They have to show proper reasons as to why they are denying an application. So sometimes we are left with going to federal court on certain cases. But we'll have to take a look at your case and see what can be done.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Um, so we've got a question from Gautam. He says, "Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your session today." I'm looking at his question. He's got three. So I'm just going to ask one to be fair to everyone. If one gets a full-time job offer after classes, can they finish their co-op hours through if the school accepts?
So co-op is co-op. The co-op has to be part of a program that is integral to your studies. It can't just be a program that like if you finish that program and you want to continue to work with that employer, then it's not part of the co-op program anymore. You'll need to qualify for a postgrad work permit or other kinds of work permits that allow you to continue to work there.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to go to the other questions, but I want to encourage you to follow up with Elizabeth because you have other questions here that you're looking to get answered as well. I'm going to move to Bamidel. Is a refugee claimant allowed to study?
Okay, so you have to apply for a study permit as a refugee claimant. We're going to do a session later on this year on refugee claims. I want to tell you guys that, as people feel this desperation where you can't stay in the country and your work permits are going to expire, a lot of people are thinking, well, maybe I should file a refugee claim. Now, a refugee claim, the system, if you get into it, you can't get out. Okay. It's something where if you file a refugee claim, they will no longer trust you to be a temporary resident. Even if later on you say, oh, wait a minute, I changed my mind. I'm going to withdraw my claim. Too late. They are not going to trust you to be a temporary resident, which means forget about getting a temporary resident visa, forget about giving a work permit or a study permit that gives you temporary status. You might be able to get a work permit, you might be able to get a study permit, but those on there will say does not confer temporary resident status. Okay. And it will also take you out of the running for a lot of programs like Express Entry, where your work experience in Canada that you work as a refugee claimant will not count towards Canadian work experience for Express Entry, for example. So, and also, for Ontario Provincial Nominee Program, they will not accept refugee claimants. So be very careful as to whether or not you're going to enter into a refugee claim system. If you do not qualify as a refugee, if you do not have the qualities and they don't find this in a hearing, then you have 30 days to leave the country. And if you don't, then it gets to be a deportation order. Whereas once you leave the country, you will need special minister's permission to come back to the country. And you can forget about getting a visa, getting anything, temporary to come back. So I want to caution you guys very much on thinking about I'm not saying that you shouldn't or you should. Some people will qualify as refugees. Some people may have a good chance to go through the refugee system. Other people won't. But I do want to caution you guys to seek proper advice as to whether or not you should. Even at my firm, I am not a refugee lawyer. I don't do a lot of work in refugee law. My partner at the firm, the Mangalji of the Long Mangalji, Ado Mangalji, he is one of the 15 specialists in refugee law in all of Canada, and he can advise you on your situation.
Thank you very much. That's really critical advice and a reality check for us as well to make sure that we understand the consequences and, students are using the right paths. So thank you so much for sharing that advice, Elizabeth. So I have a question here from Yuhua. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She says, thanks for your information. My question is, since I have to work 1 year to get work experience in Alberta to participate in the Alberta Opportunity Stream program in order to apply for my PR, but what if I cannot find a job in Alberta? Will I still be eligible to find a remote job in another province?
Okay, so first of all, you would have to qualify for the Alberta stream. And for the most part, provincial nominee programs, in order to qualify, you need to have a job offer from the employer in that province. Now, you may qualify for express entry if you worked remotely. One of the things I have to caution you guys about with regard to provincial nominee programs is provincial nominee programs very jealously guard their numbers in the sense that the provinces only get a certain amount of people who they can nominate every year. And they want to nominate people who are going to stay in the province and contribute economically to the province. So the point of most employer-based programs for provincial nominees is not just to help you, It's to help the employers who are in the province. And so for people who are applying through the provincial nominee program, you have to understand that if you go and leave the province, then you don't have permanent residence yet. After you get permanent residence, you can do whatever you want. But before you get permanent residence, if you leave the province and you've applied under provincial nominee program, your nomination could very well be rescinded. Even if you don't have, even if you have the nomination, the feds, when they look at your situation, could very well cancel your nomination. So it's very important that you consider your situation very carefully. It's just that there was a recent announcement yesterday by the minister, which where they said if you are in the pool, so not even that you have been nominated or have been invited to apply, if you are in the pool for a provincial nominee program and you get a letter of support from the province, then you can apply to extend your work permit. Now, this is a very interesting program, and I have a feeling that the provinces might not be so happy with the feds, because what happens is now it's up to the province to decide who they want to allow to extend their work permit. The feds are, they're not allowing students to extend their work permits, their postgrad work permits. Instead, they're downloading this responsibility to the province. And it's very difficult for a province to say, okay, I don't even know if this person qualifies for a program, but I do want to give them the work permit. If I give them the work permit, then there might be encouraging a lot of other people who don't qualify for the program to just put themselves into the pool. So far, we've gotten word from Ontario where they're considering, they're discussing. They haven't yet put out any rules about the support letters for this program. So stay tuned. We'll see what's happening with this program.
Okay. Wow, there's lots of changes, Elizabeth. I'm so happy that you're here on a regular basis to offer this update to students live. It's so timely. Thank you so much. We still have a number of questions, so I'm going to keep on going if that's okay. I've got a question here, which I think is a fast one. Are we allowed to work full-time hours if we are on co-op?
You can work full-time hours in your co-op program. Outside of the co-op program, it doesn't allow you to work full-time hours. Outside, the regular rules apply with regard to study permits and other things. So the co-op, only for your co-op program. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got Saranya is saying, can you please share how to apply for my SOWP for my partner? What level of work should I do, or any category works well?
So right now, it used to be that you needed to have a high-skilled work in order when you're on the postgrad work permit in order for your spouse to get it. Now it could be high-skilled or low-skilled work for your spouse, to get it, but you do need to have that job offer. It doesn't necessarily say that it has to be full-time, but you have to show that you will have enough earnings, I think, to support the family normally.
Okay. Okay. Imara is saying, can you still fill the work permit at the border?
So the work permit, depending on which work permit. Right now, the borders have stopped allowing postgrad work permit applicants to apply for the postgrad work permit at the border. They won't accept it. The borders are becoming more and more picky as to which work permits they will look at the border. And because they're being inundated right now with people at the border, so they limited a lot of the main borders have limited their time when they're accepting it. And so it really depends. But postgrad work permits, you're no longer allowed to apply at the border.
Okay, that's important to know. How about, if they have classes both in person and online? I have someone asking, it's up to students if they come in person or online. How do they prove that their attendance has been over 50% in person?
Good question. Most of the time, the officers are looking at a transcript. And so if the transcript doesn't really say that it's online, then the officers may assume that it's in person, although they can do their research. And if it shows, in the college's website, as to what it is, they may question that. But from a transcript, you know, it's not up to you to necessarily show that it's in person or not, unless it's really clear that it's not. Then you have to basically, like, it's if basically if you have a normal transcript and it says all the classes are there, I think normally an officer will say, okay, that's fine. But
Okay.
if on the transcript it shows that it's online, or if in the letter it shows it's online, or if on the website it shows it's online, then you might assume that an officer will think that it's online.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. All right. We're almost close to time. So I'm going to ask you just one last big question. I think this will apply to everyone. Do the latest changes in the temporary foreign worker policy impact international students and their postgrad work permits?
So the postgrad work permits, no. I am assuming they're asking about the changes to the announcements that they've made to the low wage temporary foreign worker program. So for the most part, most of you guys probably won't be applying under that program anytime soon. Some of you maybe, if your work permits are expiring and you need to extend it, and this is the only way to do it. What I would say to you guys is don't worry if you're just applying for the postgrad work permit, that's okay. It's not that category. Um, and if you need to apply under the low wage, come and talk to us. There are different ways that we might be able to file a work permit as well, other than this one program. I'd like to kind of just have I know we're at the 8 o'clock mark, so I just like to have one piece of thought to leave with you guys. Right now, uh, I am very disheartened by the government's, I'm sorry, by the government's stance on using international students. It's almost like they're scapegoating international students, workers, and blaming you guys for the housing crisis, which is really not your fault at all. And the tides are turning, it seems, where people's attitudes about students, where people's attitudes about workers, where you guys are, one of the most important aspects of the growth and sustainability of our nation and of our economy, and of our population growth, whereas they now are turning the tides and saying, making all these assumptions about you guys. And the environment is really getting more and more hostile, which is very, very unfortunate. I'm going to say this to you guys. Don't give up. There are ways to do it if you plan properly and do it right. The international student route is still one of the best ways to get permanent residence, but you have to be a lot more systematic. You have to be a lot more wily as to how to maneuver your way through the system. It's no longer, pre-pandemic days when most students, if you graduate, you work in a high-skilled job for 1 year, you're more or less, for the most part, able to get enough points to get permanent residence. No longer in that case, because there's so many students now in the country, and there's so few spots left for you guys. And it could get even worse next year if there's an election and the conservatives win. But keep in mind the rules that I told you. Come for a consultation. We'll make a plan, and we can try to get you guys on the right path and get there. And please don't give up, because you guys are truly the people that we need to be in this country. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being in this country. And I really do hope that you guys can stay.
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your continued support and your advice and words of inspiration. Really, I think that it's really welcome right now by a lot of our students. Thank you guys so much for attending. I'm just going to ask as well, please want to encourage you to reach out to Elizabeth for further consultation. I'm going to ask you to please give us your feedback in terms of the session today. I have a little poll coming up here. If you would recommend this session to a friend, if you know someone that could benefit from this information, or if you didn't get a question answered and you want to join again, we will be offering other sessions. We host these sessions every week on a Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. They're all for free, all for you. I also want to share a little bit about our upcoming events as well. So let me see if I can take over the screen quickly. I'm just going to leave the poll up for a few more minutes. I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to leave it open. Please do respond to the poll. I'm going to end the poll now. Very high reviews, like, thank you so much for your feedback. And again, Elizabeth, you've been amazing and very generous with your time to answer so many questions. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we are going to have another seminar on immigration with Elizabeth on how to get permanent residence with a low express entry score. Please mark your calendars on September 25th for that important session on immigration. And we will have next week employer insights. You can ask a recruiter. We have Quadreel joining us. I'm going to give you tips. They've got open jobs. You can ask them questions. I will be moderating that session as well from 7 to 4. Really excited to have them here. On September the 11th, we have a workshop on finding a job in Canada. Those are for students who are our portal users. So that would be if your school is working with Devant, you would get a special session on September the 11th. And you can go onto our website and hit the login page, and you use your school email address to get access to some of these special events. On September 18th, we've got Career Coach Q&A. And as I mentioned, on September 25th, we have the Immigration Q&A. Also on October 17th, just want to highlight to you, we are going to be offering our Get Hired at Home event, where you'll be able to meet with recruiters, have speed interviews. We'll also have sessions on financial literacy, networking cafes, and Elizabeth will be back to do another immigration session again for you. Finally, wanting to just let you know that there are additional supports to help you with your job search. Please make sure you connect with your career services first. There are free resources. You've got career coaches and supports available at your career center. In addition to that, at Devant, we offer one-on-one career coaching, LinkedIn audits, and resume and cover letter writing to complement what your career centers and your additional supports you have available for free can do for you. So please reach out to us to get that information. And then finally, if you're struggling to understand your immigration options, we have an online tool, a partnership with Improved, and you can start there to get an idea of what your points are. But as I said before, please make sure that you are reaching out to get advice from a lawyer individually, specifically to answer your questions. Elizabeth is available, as she mentioned. There is also a discount for students that are working through Devant, or attending our events. So again, I just want to thank you so much again, Elizabeth. We wouldn't be able to provide this good information on a timely basis without you. It was absolutely phenomenal. And I just want to launch one more quick poll here. And I'm going to ask everyone for your feedback. We just really would love to know, how did you hear about this event? Please let us know if you heard about it from your school, from the newsletter, from social media, from a classmate. We're always looking at ways to reach students, and we're looking to make sure that more and more students get good, reliable information. And all of our events are delivered by experts and individuals who are well connected and certified in their area of expertise. So please take a moment. I'd love to hear from you, and feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, your name, what school you're from. If you want to connect with each other, we want to, leverage this session for you. We also have a closed, private Facebook group for you to connect with peers. And then finally, we will be recruiting for our ambassador volunteer programs coming up again as well. So it looks like, based on your feedback, I'm just going to give you 2 more seconds to please answer. Looks like from the school and the Devant newsletter and the school portal. Thank you guys so much for sharing your feedback on how you're getting the information. I'm just going to share the results so that you can see. I know some people are dropping off, Elizabeth, because it's over 8 o'clock, but thank you so much for staying on. Have a good evening, everyone. Again, feel free to reach out to us and go back onto the Devant website where you can see more events and more support. And we'll love to hear from you. Good luck, everyone. And we'll see you hopefully next Wednesday. Bye, Elizabeth.
Everyone, bye-bye.